Today on the show, our hot-headed reactions are going to get us in trouble. But, hey, at least we get to come home to hurrah at the end of a long, hard day on the battlefield.
That's right.
Best feeling in the world.
Indeed.
Find
yourself a hurrah.
She's
if
awesome.
If your work requires hard, sweaty work on the battlefield, nothing better than coming home to hurrah.
Knifing some off-worlders. Great shoulder massages. It's great. Deep conversation. Wonderful.
That's right. We all deserve a partner like hurrah.
A little freaked out by kids, but...
Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name's Abu.
My name's Leo.
And Leo, we are back, sir. It's been a while since we've done a Spice Morsels episode.
It's true.
But we got a plate full of morsels, and we're going to be chomping down.
We absolutely are. Indeed. But before we get too far into it, let's talk through some very brief housekeeping. And first up, spoiler warning. Spoilers for the first book. That's it.
That's right.
Nothing else, just that first book. If you've read the first book, you're good to go.
That is right. Now, as always, a quick shout out to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, Matthew Good, Case Aiken. Gentlemen, if I ended up partnering with either of you, I would take care of your children as if they were my own.
Sure.
You've shown us such generosity. It would be my duty to show you that generosity back.
In this situation, are you the Ganima? Are you the spoil of war?
Right.
Guys, if you won me in one-on-one combat...
Exactly. Once they defeated my current partner in one-on-one combat and won me as their partner, then I would show them generosity. This is a long-winded way of saying thank you for supporting the show. And of course, that thank you extends to all of our patrons and all of our listeners who tune in to every single episode. The show wouldn't be possible without all of you.
That is a problematic precedent to set, though, if we show up to like live shows and people just start squaring off on our partners. They're like, I'm going to win him. It's mine. It's like, oh, wow, this meet and greet's going great.
Right. Our live shows are going to get pretty bloody if we set this precedent, and I'm not entirely against it.
Amtal. Meet and greets via Amtal. Yes. Okay, well, that was housekeeping. Today, let's talk about today's episode. Let's look at kind of a brief overview of what the episode's going to look like. This is one of our coveted morsel episodes. So top to bottom, we're going to talk about some spice morsels, exploring the nooks and crannies, the seldom visited nooks and crannies of the Dune universe, and of course the Dune Encyclopedia.
Right.
Our favorite little collection of weird articles.
That's right. And these morsels are often parts of the Dune lore that aren't quite big enough to have their own episode. Like, sure, Leo and I could talk about Jameis for 99 minutes, but should we? Probably not.
Yeah.
So instead, these morsels get lumped together into today's episode. They're fun little details that add to the world building, that add to the universe that Frank created, but not quite big enough to get their own episode. So we lump them all together, slop them down on our plate, and chomp down on them. So with that having been said, let's do it. I'm hungry. I hope you're hungry, dear listener. Let's eat some morsels.
Let's do it. And our first morsel today is, and we promise, again, it's not cannibalism, Jameis.
Jameis!
Paul's first kill with a naked blade, as we're told. But let's learn a little bit more about him, because he actually does have quite an interesting life from the Dune Encyclopedia. And this begins with his birth, classic beginning to a life, in the year 10,159 AG to, why did I launch into this? I'm bad with names.
Oh, boy.
Oh, my God. This also makes the later name that much funnier, because these names are so... Okay. The first name is Deoces. Deoces?
Yeah.
That's a name.
I like that pronunciation. I support.
It sounds more Greek than it looks. And then there's, so his father is, let's just say Deoces. It's Dioces. And mother, Madai, maybe, which is Madai. And Deoces, his father, was a respected warrior.
Okay.
Makes sense. Jameis is a bit of a fighter. Yeah, Papa's a fighter. He's a fighter.
Yeah.
And then his mother, Madai, is described as, quote, a gentle, intelligent woman who carefully supervised her son's education, end quote.
All right.
Which is so sweet.
That's awesome.
What a great little family unit to come from.
Yeah.
Now, his mother was the one, so Madai was the one that insisted that Jameis attend Pardo Kyne's lecture on ecology, his various lectures that he was giving to the Fremen people, educating them about ecology. Which, by the way, I never imagined Pardo Kyne's having like a lecture series on Arrakis, but going siege to siege and doing little TED Talks, that's kind of a fun world building piece of the puzzle.
Right.
But that going to those lectures is very likely what led him to be a sort of fanatic believer in the dream for a green Arrakis.
Right.
So his belief in everything that then Liet inherited from their father, right? Now, additionally, the Dune Encyclopedia also speculates that Jameis might have already kind of been predisposed to fall in line with Pardo's visions,
right?
Because Pardo Kynes saved Deoces, saved Jameis's father. So there's a very direct connection here between Pardo Kynes, Liet Kynes, the whole thing, and Jameis's family unit. So his father was saved by Pardo Kynes. Mother's like, you should attend that dude's lectures. He saved your dad.
Yeah.
He did, fell in line with the dream for a green Arrakis. And whatever the case, that was a little bit of speculation regarding like his maybe affinity toward Pardo. Whatever the case, he definitely fell in line with that dream for a green Arrakis.
That's right. And, that's really his education and his work life. But what's interesting and what we love about the encyclopedia is it also expands on Jameis's character when it concerns his hobbies. Because there's a whole section in the encyclopedia that talks about how Jameis threw himself into the work of transforming Arrakis, into working with and alongside the Kynes.
Right.
But also that he was very passionate about his hobbies, in particular, music and dance. Can you imagine?
Oh my God. I love that so much.
That's incredible. Now, music was his greatest pleasure, we're told. And the Dune Encyclopedia explains that Jameis became adept after trying a number of different instruments. He ultimately settled on and became quite adept at playing the 9-string balisette, which apparently is one of the most difficult instruments in the Dune universe.
Right.
So our guy is kind of like an indie rock band badass. I love this part of Jameis that we clearly don't see in the films or even in the books at all, really. And in addition to his music, he was also really into dance and mastered quite a few dance moves as well.
Yeah.
So it's fun to think of Jameis really breaking it down on the dance floor at Fremen weddings.
It makes it a lot easier to, the kind of classic saying, I was a friend of Jameis, right?
Yeah.
A lot easier to be friends with the dude, knowing he's into music and dancing. And, you walk without rhythm out in the sands, but on the dance floor, he moves with rhythm.
He's got great rhythm. That's so true. That's so true.
Or maybe you dance without rhythm to avoid attracting worms.
Right. Can you imagine all of that rhythm happening at once? That would attract worms for miles. Fremen weddings.
Millions of worms.
Can easily turn into a bloodbath, clearly.
Is that a dance party?
Feeding time.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to his musical and dance floor talents, we also know that Jameis was a ferocious fighter. And we're told that he actually had a, quote, inclination toward violence since early childhood. So he was a ferocious guy from the start, and this we'll actually come to learn gets him into trouble quite a few times. Now, because of his natural inclination toward fighting, he actually easily earned his crysknife and became a sand rider at the young age of 12, which initiated him into the ranks of Fremen fighters.
Right.
And we're told that he actually surpassed even his father as a warrior. His father, as we know, was a respected Fremen warrior, and Jameis became even better. And the encyclopedia observes that even as a young man, Jameis had the qualities that might have led someday to him in a leadership position. Quote, bravery, resourcefulness, and, perhaps most important, ambition, as well as the major flaw that would bar him forever from authority, faulty self-control, end quote. And there's the rub right there.
You know, I appreciate the kind of complexity. You say you don't really want a hot-headed Sietch leader.
Yeah.
You don't want a Nabe who's like eager to shed unnecessary Fremen blood, but still, maybe he'd mature into it, right? Like maybe in his 40s, his 50s. I can't remember how old he is when we meet him. Wait, doing the math, he's in his mid 30s when we meet him, and he's like hot-headed in his 30s. Fine. In his 50s, maybe he'd calm down a bit. I think bar him forever from authority. That's harsh. Come on, give him some fucking time to grow up.
Interesting that you have that take, because I'm almost entirely the opposite. I think if by your mid-30s you're still challenging little white boys from Caladan, you have much more maturing to do, and I would not trust you to like lead a whole siege of Fremen.
But he's so challengeable. Fucking look at him. Look at that little wisp of a man. I'm the Lisan al-Gaib. Fucking nerd. Right. I'll challenge you, idiot.
Here's the thing, Leo. Here's the thing. Hall wasn't the first time his hot-headed behavior got him in trouble.
Yeah.
The Dune Encyclopedia makes it clear that there are records that indicate Jameis has undergone a number of disciplinary actions because of like hot-headed or impatient behavior on and off the battlefield. So this is like a repeat problem that he's had for many, many years, and it continues to basically hold him back from any sort of leadership position, even though he has many of the qualities that would have made him a good leader. It's really a double-edged sword, right? That this fiery disposition makes him deadly on the battlefield. It has earned him renown and respect on the battlefield as a Fremen fighter. But that very same disposition is what holds him back from leadership. And the encyclopedia actually says that later in life, Stilgar would write down, quote, there's too much violence in Jameis for him ever to make a good leader. Too much gafla, end quote.
Interesting. Fun.
And look, I trust Stilgar's words here, you know.
Always.
Stilgar knows how to read his people. Yeah. Stilgar's a great leader. And if he looks at Jameis and he goes, man, you're not ready yet, I believe him.
Got way too much fucking gafla. Are you kidding me? Way too much gafla. Looking at Jameis head to toe, you're like, that's 7 or 8 gafla for sure. That's way too much. Yeah.
Yikes. It's over 9,000 gafla.
It's over 9. Vegeta! It's like Scouter say about his gafla. What? That's just such a core memory.
Yeah, truly.
Well, let's wrap up talking about Jameis by touching on his domestic life. So, very famously, after Paul defeats Jameis, he gets a wife, because that's how it works, which is Hurrah.
Right.
But let's talk about how Hurrah came to be with Jameis. So basically, Jameis challenged Hurrah's previous partner, who has, by a margin, the most boring fucking name I've seen of any Fremen person. Because I want to be clear, this is a Fremen. Let's list some Fremen. We've got Asan Tariq.
Oh, yeah.
We've got Stilgar. Ben Alfie, right? Something like that.
Yum.
We've got... the smugglers, Esmar Tuick.
Right.
We've got Liet Kynes, part of because they're off-worlders, but it's fine.
Super like.
And then we have Hurrah's husband, Jeff. Also our editor's name, spelled the same way, by the way. So, what up, Jeff? How was it being married to Hurrah?
Yeah.
Until Jameis challenged you and killed you.
Right.
How was that?
Incredible. I can already see Jeff the Fremen's Tinder profile. He works at Deloitte. He went to grad school at Georgetown.
Yeah.
His opening photo is him in a suit.
Yeah.
I can see it now.
Jeff is just such a funny name to
Yeah.
me. And I get that also this is
It is.
the story that has all of these incredible names, and then Paul is the main character.
Fair.
But still, it feels very strange to have a Fremen, a wild desert, like, survivor and fighter named Jeff. Anyway, okay. So Jameis challenged Jeff. What a sentence. And pretty easily bested him in combat. Took him out. Now, by Hurrah's accounts, Jameis became very quickly a loving husband and father.
Okay.
Quote, he was a tender lover and good provider,
Wow.
bringing her many water rings after sorties against Harkonnen patrols. She says he loved their children, Caliph, Jeff's son, and Orlop, their own. He made no distinction between them and accorded the same devotion to their upbringing. End quote.
Wow.
And again, fucking driving home the goddamn... Jeff named his son Caliph.
Right.
What a cool name from fucking Jeff. And Orlop. That's a One Piece character. You can't fool me.
100%. It is nice to hear, though, that Jameis, as fiery and hot-headed and unruly as he could be on the battlefield,
Yeah.
he was the exact opposite when he got home. He really left work at work and only remained the father and husband that he needed to be at home.
Right.
And I find it quite touching, actually, that he adopted Jeff's son as his own and treated them no differently. I think that tells us the type of character Jameis is, right? It tells us a lot about the type of man he is and the type of Fremen that he is, that he would treat them in exactly the same way.
Yeah. I mean, in a universe that Frank created that dodges a lot of the sort of like very caricature, the characters who are just like two-dimensional cutouts, I really like this depth of Jameis, tender lover.
Right.
Lover of music. Plays a fucking really hard balisette, like a really difficult instrument.
Yeah.
Loving stepfather, kind of stepfather, Fremen's stepfather. Very good caregiver.
Yeah.
Lovely qualities. Awesome. Much easier to be a friend of Jameis, indeed.
Definitely. This really changed my opinion on Jameis, for sure, doing this research. All right, well, let's wrap up, because we all know what happens ultimately. Alas, Jameis's hot-headed nature gets the best of him in a fatal and final showdown with some scrawny kid from off-planet named Paul Atreides.
Ugh, just hearing his name, I want to challenge him. Paul? Yeah, fucking challenge that kid.
Right, right.
Try to kill him, for sure.
I think what we're realizing through this discussion is Jameis had a problem with people who had boring fucking names. Jeff, Paul.
Yeah, holy shit.
He was on a mission to eradicate boring names.
Look at the body count, all the people he's killed, and it's like, then he battled Jonathan, and then he battled Steve, and then he killed... That's so funny.
Yeah, oof. I can't imagine what the day looked like when the Fremen Bob Smith came across Jameis's path. That must have been a bloodbath.
Jameis, through clenched teeth, he's like, is that fucking short for Robert? Is it Bobathy? And he's like, it's Robert. And he's like, he attacks him.
Wrong answer. Hilarious. Well, to wrap up Jameis, as we know, Paul bests him in combat, and Jameis's story comes to an end. But his legacy is maintained because the Dune Encyclopedia tells us that in her book, The Songs of Muad'Dib, Irulan actually recorded this poem in memory of Jameis, and I thought this was a beautiful poem, so here it is in full. Quote, "Do you wrestle with dreams? Do you contend with shadows? Do you move in a kind of sleep? Time has slipped away. Your life is stolen. You tarried with trifles. Victim of your folly." End quote.
That's beautiful.
That's beautiful. It really encapsulates his life.
I feel like that could be lyrics to a Queen song.
Oh,
yeah.
I think you're right. We just need a 9-string balisette riff in there somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Electric Palisade. Yeah.
All right, so that's our spice morsel on Jameis. I genuinely am glad I dug into this research and learned a bit more about him, because I've really come to appreciate Jameis more as a character.
Yeah.
And really come to appreciate him as a husband and a father. It really rounds out his character in a way that the book simply doesn't have time to, right? We see him for one scene, we have one key interaction with him and Paul,
right.
And that's about it. So it's good to learn a bit more about him, and I've really come to respect Jameis. Dare I say, I am a friend of Jameis.
Oh, I am too. Oh, he's great. Well, for all friends of Jameis, let's take a quick break. And when we're back, we got a couple more morsels for you. So don't go anywhere. We got some maker hooks. We got some wine. We're getting drunk and hooking up right after this.
Welcome back, folks. Let's continue working our way through this giant portion on our plate. Next up, our next morsel is maker hooks.
Indeed.
So, in Dune Part 1, we actually got a tease. We got a glimpse at the maker hooks, but we didn't get to see them in action. However, in the Dune Part 2 trailer, we saw Paul's first sandworm. We know this will be a pivotal scene in Part 2. So let's talk about these maker hooks and learn a bit more about them.
Indeed.
So, put simply, maker hooks are tools used by the Fremen to capture, mount, and steer the great sandworms of the desert.
Right.
Now, sadly, the Dune Encyclopedia tells us that there are no remaining records of the origin of the maker hooks or of any predecessor technology. We don't know who made them, when they were made, how the first ever hooks came to be. No idea. Those records have been lost to time and lost to the desert.
Really unfortunate, because you have to imagine that those very first attempts were audacious.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, I got a plan. And you're like, what's the fucking plan? And you're like, the worms?
Right.
Yeah. I wanna climb one. It's like, what is that first attempt?
What? Bob Smith, no!
Bob Smith, no. He's like, I got to, though, because Jameis keeps trying to fight me, and this is the only way I'm going to get out of this.
I either have to change my name to Boba Fee or ride a worm. I have no option. This Jameis guy's going to kill me. Yeah, I would have loved to learn who the Wright brothers of sandworm writing were. Who first came up with the idea that we should literally hook onto these giant creatures and ride them. Alas, we don't know. What we do know is that modern maker hooks were long shafts made of something called spice plastic, and they ranged in length from 1.3 to 2.1 meters.
What is that in real numbers?
In real numbers, 4 to 7 feet.
4 to 7 feet. Cool.
And at one end was a plasteel hook with a barbed tip. And obviously this was the part that was used to latch onto the sandworm's ring segments. So, if you're trying to teach Arya Stark to ride a sandworm, you tell her, hook it with the hooky end.
Right. all the people trying to hook with the handle, they're like, oh, it's not working.
It's not working.
You're like, you gotta hook with the hooky end. Well, as we know from the book, it's not so simple, right? You don't just kind of put 2 fingers in your mouth, blow a big whistle, worm gallops up, you can hop on. No, it's complicated.
Right.
It's a hell of a feat. It's something to be proud of, unless you're Gurney, at which point you're totally dismissive of it. You're like, what do you mean? I saw someone do it once so I did it.
Right.
Why is everyone clapping? This is so strange. And the process begins as a rider latches onto a passing worm and then peels back one of the ring segments, these protective ring segments that protect the worm from the abrasive sand. And that exposed gap then is a deterrent, and the worm will move or roll so that that exposed segment is as far from the sand as possible, which, of course, hoists the rider, which is great.
Right.
And because of that, and this is actually I love this because in a lot of cultures, you'll see stuff like this. I did I'm mostly Scottish, so I was doing research about Scottish, the different wars that the different tribes and clans would do.
Mhm.
And a big
Yeah.
part of like you prove that you're ready to fight by like lifting a big rock and putting it on a fence. It's kind of fun.
Okay.
So similar concept in the Fremen culture, you demonstrate that you're ready to be like an active fighting guy by demonstrating that you can ride a sandworm. So the hooks became emblematic and symbolic of that maturing kind of threshold of you're just a weak, tiny 12-year-old child, and then you ride a worm and it's like, well, fucking I was wrong, now you're a man. It's very it's very direct, very sweet. Now, because of this, naturally, superstitions also got kind of tagged on to maker hooks. A hook that had never failed was considered lucky.
Okay.
And its owner was given special respect, which is really like very lucky pair of socks or like lucky underwear vibes.
Yeah,
You're like,
totally.
no, these are my hooks. Like, these have never failed me. This continues the problematic trend of people being like, oh, you're a good artist, that must be a good paintbrush. Or like, oh, you're a good photographer, that must be a nice camera.
Yeah.
Like, wow, you've never failed writing a worm? Those must be great hooks. It's like,
Right.
fuck you. This is a demonstration
Bro.
of my skill. Bro, I've practiced so much. It's like, I don't know, they must be good hooks.
Yeah, wish I had hooks like yours, man. I wouldn't have fallen off the worm last week. It's like, no, you fell off because you're a
He's
fucking
always fucking saying that.
like imbalanced prick. Okay, don't make me introduce you to my friend Jameis. Okay,
You piece of shit, Bob. Bob Smith. You, yeah. You unbalanced bastard. Get back on that worm. Now, the other side of that coin, right? Never failed. Hooks never failed. Lucky hooks. Other side, if a rider, a fucking unbalanced bastard Bob, fell off a worm or failed to hook a worm,
yeah,
it was said to bring bad luck on the entire tribe for that day.
oh my
Which-
gosh.
I'm glad it's just a day. Like, I'm glad it's just a 24-hour cycle.
I'm glad there's a timeline to it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very much like don't walk under an open ladder, you'll be unlucky. You know, having a black cat cross your path, you'll be unlucky. It's that same energy with the maker hooks here,
Right.
or worm riding. If someone in your tribe fails to latch onto that worm today,
Yeah.
don't you play the lotto.
Yeah. the scratch lotto ticket sales that day are abysmal because fucking Bob fell off the worm again.
Right. Again,
Yeah.
always.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
That's fun. And, you know, that's not a whole lot of information about the maker hooks, but I think it's still interesting to see the cultural role that they play for the Fremen, as well as the very practical tool that they are for Fremen transportation in the deep desert, you know? Like, before maker hooks, before worm riding, I'm sure it was very difficult to get around the deep desert and very difficult to go far distances. So they're a critical part of Fremen culture and a critical tool in their toolkit.
It's true. Legend says before riding sandworms, Fremen had to rely entirely on Heelys, which is awful in the sand.
Awful.
It's like a terrible way of getting around.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's really terrible. Get sand in your Heelys?
Oh. Ugh. Can you imagine? And you'd have to be replacing those things all the time. They get rusted so quickly. All the sand abrasion in there.
Constantly. Yeah.
Yeah, but there just simply was no other way, right? Like skateboards, not possible. It had to be Heelys.
Yeah. The smugglers, it's like, it's really suspicious that you're always going out into the desert with those crates of Heelys. Like, that's just a suspicious amount of Heelys. They're like, well, I'll tell you, sand gets in them. And we have fun out in the sand. Are you hating on Heelys?
I never had Heelys as a kid, and I was always so jealous.
I never had them either. My shoe size was my age, starting when I was 12. So
LOL.
So I just couldn't buy fun shoes.
Yeah. Wow. Look at us. Look at us on our poor regular shoe childhoods. Woe is us.
Yeah, we couldn't be like those Fremen kids chasing scorpions on their Heelys.
All right, so let's talk about our last spice morsel for today's episode. This one's a fun one
Indeed.
because it's Caladan wines.
Yep.
This was cool. I came across this in the encyclopedia and I was like, damn, we got to talk about this. So The entry in the Dune Encyclopedia on Caladan wines is interesting because it's framed as an excerpt from a dining guide from the court of the Carino emperors about 100 years before Paul's time, which is so fun.
Yeah, that's cool.
We know that the encyclopedia is positioned as a historical document.
Right.
So as part of the historical documentation, they've taken this excerpt from a dining guide and included it, which is just a great framing device. So fun. Dune Encyclopedia, 12 out of 10.
Yeah.
Now, the entry itself explains some of the challenges that the winemakers on Caladan faced, as well as getting into detail about some of the various wines that they were able to eventually produce, having overcome some of those challenges.
Right. Now, the challenges themselves are basically twofold. The challenges facing these winemakers. First, and this sucks. This sucks. I have never wanted to live in the Caladanian star system less than now.
Yeah.
Apparently, the star at the center of that system emits a, quote, yeast-inhibiting radiation spectrum, end quote, making a lot of the traditional fermentation techniques a no-go, basically.
Yeah.
So alcohol making is challenging in this star system. And second, the people who live in the system, and it's a little unclear to me if this is kind of a chicken and egg situation. I don't know if this is because of the yeast inhibiting radiation or,
right,
in spite of it, maybe. But the people in this system just don't really drink that much.
Yeah.
And apparently, the, quote, average per capita annual wine consumption on Caladan is a meager 1.5 liters. And
wow. Annual.
So, like, if you picture a bottle of wine, that's 750 milliliters. Yeah. So one person will have the equivalent, on average, per capita, 2 bottles of wine per year, which that's not very much. I mean, as someone who can get through that in a week,
hello,
that's pretty light. That's pretty light work. Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta pump those numbers up, Caladan.
Yeah. You gotta go for a new PR. Drink more wine. What are you doing?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I do wonder, like you've said, whether it's a chicken or the egg situation there. Do they not drink a lot because it's just hard to make good stuff?
Yeah.
Or they don't make good stuff because it's not worth it because culturally they don't drink a lot.
Like there's no demand supply.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know.
That having been said, though, the Atreides royal family did want some of the good stuff, right?
Right.
And they invested their time and effort and money and resources into experimentation and research to try and work around some of these challenges that they faced, the radiation, the cultural norms, to still be able to create as good a glass as possible of wine.
Right.
And in some respects, they were successful. And the encyclopedia goes on to explain and list some of the unique types of wine that were made on Caladan.
Indeed. Now, the 3 types of wine that they outline are, oh God, I always do the names. This sucks. Are Caseric. Caseric,
that's
maybe.
Good. Ooh, yeah, that sounds like a wine.
It sounds like a wine, right? A Caseric, a Merlot, a Pinot Grigio, Caseric. Mm-hmm. Well, this is a dry red wine, best had between 5 and 8 years after bottling. So it's best to age it to about 5 years and have it then. It's a dry red wine. And apparently the first fruit stock, this is according to legend, but the first fruit stock was brought to the planet by House Atreides, right? Because House Atreides only took over planet Caladan, I think, a few thousand years before the beginning of Dune. So whatever they came from before that, they brought fruit stock. And that Caladan Caseric remains the favorite Atreidian kind of ceremonial wine.
Nice.
Possibly because of its roots with the Atreides family. So that's the first one. We've got this dry red wine called the Caseric. Next up, we've got the Bornola, which is a light red wine highly alcoholic.
Okay.
This is crazy. 16%.
Get turned.
16%. I feel like most wines are in like the 12 to 14% range. Like 16 is that's a glass that'll hit harder than you expect it to.
Right.
And although most Caledonian wines had kind of a mustiness to their flavor, the Bornola lacked it almost entirely. And the only thing really standing between it and being a like galactically enjoyed brand of wine or like type of wine is the fact that its shelf life is so short.
Yeah.
Basically, it gets noticeably worse in just its third year.
Wow.
So you've bottled it, you've basically got 2 years to drink it, or it'll start to get a little bit of that like mustiness that comes from a lot of Caledonian wines. So you can't really ship it. You can't really like export it off world. And then finally, we have Delkai, which is a sweet white wine called, quote, never much better than ordinary. Quote, which, yeah, I feel like people have described me that way. That's pretty solid.
Ouch. Yeah.
And it's basically the $2 chuck of Caladan. So it's like the cheap, drinkable, accessible Trader Joe's brand wine.
I see. Okay.
Produced from native grapes, which is, impressive. It's nice to have kind of local stuff. And while there were a lot of different ways it can be made, there was even a note on like every family protected their own like family secret, like chemical process to ferment it. It across the board is just a very solid drinkable option. And apparently they even made a sparkling variety, which, quote, the Atreides family most frequently serves when ritual or propriety indicates that a Caledonian flavor is desired.
Okay.
End quote. So they've got their ceremonial caseric, or if they're like, no, we actually do want people to enjoy their time at dinner. Let's serve the Delkai. Let's serve the sweet, sparkling Delkai white wine.
Right. It's the dinner where it's okay to get a little rowdy, Everyone can loosen their ties a bit.
Yeah.
Open up their waistcoats and be like, all right, we're cutting loose a little bit. Let's go with the Delkai tonight. The caseric is like your more upscale, your uppity dinner where you only have a few sips. Polite society. That's fun.
And I also wanted to point out, I pulled open the chapter of the dinner scene, right? The dinner party sequence in Dune, right?
Right. Iconic.
Well, quote, servants began putting plates of food on the table at the Duke's gesture, releasing them. And then, in a little bit, a true patatoire, maybe, served with sparkling Caladan wine. End quote.
There it is.
So there you have it. Almost certainly the famous dinner scene. If you were wondering, you're like, okay, these... interpersonal politics, the hand signs, all of that's fine.
Right.
What fucking wine is on the table?
Yeah.
Most important detail, it's the Delkai.
That's right.
It's that sweet $2 chuck that they brought out in their big flagons. And they're like, we're going to get people fucking drunk tonight.
Right.
Hell yeah.
Which completely makes sense. The Atreides would want the people at that table to be pretty buzzed for negotiations.
It's true. Bring out the bubbles.
That's right. Well, as a final aside, the editor of the Dune Encyclopedia in this section tosses in a mention of suji, which is a highly alcoholic pundi rice-derived liquor that was popular on Caladan among the lower class, mainly because of its low cost and efficacy at getting absolutely trashed.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the real-world analogy to this would be, but I almost imagine this is like the Four Loko of Caladan, maybe? I'm not super knowledgeable about alcohol.
I think it's somewhere between like sake, because it's a rice-derived
that's more
liquor.
Yeah, that's more
so
accurate.
it's like something like sake, but then also kind of like moonshine, because it sounds like people are kind of doing this on their own just to get fucking drunk. So it's sort of at-home DIY.
You're right.
You're just distilling anything you can.
Yes.
Just throw it at the wall, let it ferment.
I love that.
Hope it's drinkable.
That's absolutely correct. A mix of sake and moonshine would be what suji is on Caladan. So there we go. that's our last morsel for today. Caladan wines and a little bonus liquor extract if you really want to get trashed. That wraps up our morsels for today. Look at that. Hashtag Clean Plate Club, Leo. We've done it.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Now, before we let you go, and before we go, we want to remind you of some ways to support the show and everything we do here at Gom Jabbar. And the first and best way, we've said it before, we'll say it again.
Right.
Become a patron, please. Patreon.com/Gom Jabbar is the place to show your support. And hey, in exchange for your support, you'll get cool benefits. Ad-free episodes. Weekly blooper clips. And an invite to our exclusive Dune server. Bow chicka wow wow. Where we chat and sometimes have some like heated conversations. It got a little spicy in the Discord recently.
It did get spicy.
Good to see people passionate about things.
A bunch of Dune nerds having like a hot, sweaty conversation about politics and philosophy in there. It's fun. It's a fun time.
Geopolitics. Ooh. Never sounded sexier.
Hello. Now, another great way to support us is to check out our merch store on gomjabarshop.com. It's all Dune-themed merch.
Indeed.
We've got art up there. We've got apparel. We've got mugs, a tote bag, socks. If you need a lucky pair of socks, folks, gomjabarshop.com.
Hell yeah. You can walk without rhythm. You can dance with it, however you want to do it. And finally, we love to hear from you. So send us an email, gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your concerns, your favorite things about Dune, or whatever else you're reading these days.
Right.
We just love to hear from you. So send us an email, gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com.
That's right. All right, you wanna go grab some sushi, Leo? And I know it's like 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, but it's probably 5 p.m. on Caladan.
Shots of sushi, yeah. Shots of sushi. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. I think it's good to do some shots of sushi, and then we'll have some Bornola, and we'll find some boring ass names to beat up.
Yeah, that's good. That's the ideal way I like to spend my Tuesday mornings as well.
Yeah. Track down some Johns.
Make Jameis proud, our boy. I was a friend of Jameis.
Like, what's your name? Mordecai? Okay, you're good.
Okay, you want some sushi?
You pass. You want some sushi? We got drinks for anybody with cool names.
Slowly, we build up a whole gang of very drunk, plain name-hating warriors.
Yeah.
This is how cults start. This is how cults who drink sushi and kill people that are named John and Bob start.
It's true. As it starts as a podcast about a very specific niche sci-fi book series, and then slowly snowballs into just a roaming band of bandits. Totally.
Yeah. Love it. I can't wait for that phase of our podcast journey, the roaming bandit phase. Join us. Patrons, you're up first to join the band, to roam and band with us. Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @lore_party. And hey, we're also on TikTok at Gom Jabbar Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.